But right now, let's welcome Dr. William Rosenberg, professor of political science at Drexel University, co-author of News Verdicts, The Debates and Presidential Campaigns, and The Politics of Disenchantment, Bush, Clinton, Perot, and the Press, tweeting at Dr. B. Rosenberg. Professor, welcome to the show.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. What is on your mind on this fine Monday morning?
Well, I'm a little bit concerned about the landscape of politics. We're living in strange times. We're dealing with a presidential election that has many winding paths taking place, including the whole process of how votes are going to be cast, how votes are going to be counted, what the candidates are up to in terms of particularly the president now suffering from COVID and the lack of transparency that appears to be taking place, and how all that sets up an event on November 3rd when many Americans are expecting to know who the winner is going to be, but in reality they really won't because of the mechanisms that are in place.
Yeah, Professor, I've been jokingly saying for the past couple of weeks on my regular show, The Big Picture, 6 p.m. Eastern, that actually we should be branding Sirius's coverage of this presidential campaign as Decision 2022.
Well, the problem is that there's actually an election calendar, and in this year we have more people probably than ever going to go out and cast votes early. In the past elections, we've seen almost 35 or 40% of the voters casting their votes before Election Day. And what we have is a matrix going around the country of how all of this works. Everything is regulated essentially in terms of Election Day by the states. They determine when ballots can be open, where the polling places will be, and so forth. But at the same time, there's this constitutional process that's laid out that says in effect that the first Tuesday after the first Monday in November is the formal federal election day, and then basically gives a time in which the states can count up the votes. And basically that deadline is going to be in November and then early December, where the electors go to the state capitals, either Trump electors or Biden electors, and they're going to cast their votes. They're going to then send them on to Washington on December 14th. And then in early January, the Congress, January 6th, are going to open up these ballots and see who won. The problem is if we don't have an election that casts a winner on the Electoral College ballots, the House of Representatives comes into play. So that there's so many little nuances that for people thinking they're going to watch, CNN or ABC on election night and know who won, they're not. And I think that's really part of the strategy that's going on perhaps with the Trump campaign, that they might like to claim victory on election night, but they may not actually have the true ballot counts at that time.
Well, we know they won't.
It's going to put us in a problem. Well, it's going to put us into a serious problem. And in fact, one of the things that I'm encouraging many people to do, unless they absolutely have to, not to vote early, because you want to have as many votes as you can on election night to show the greatest percentage of votes either for Biden or for Trump, so that we have a better clue, so that people can't make statements and develop an image of actually who won.
Well, I remain hopeful that our colleagues in TV have learned the lessons of the 2018 midterms as well as the Iowa caucuses. 2018, you know this, but the phenomenon is called the blue shift, right? Where when more Democrats vote by mail and these ballots are counted after the in-person stuff, you see a shift. You definitely saw that in the 2018 midterms when there was no sign of a blue wave in the early returns, and it sort of crystallized over the following week.
Well, I think you have a little bit more confidence in the media than I do, because I remember 20 or 30 years ago, there was a big debate about should the media be able to call the winner of the election before all votes are counted. And that was really about not so much early voting, but the election numbers coming into the networks, and then them calling the election before people, perhaps in California or people in Hawaii even got a chance to go to the polls. So this is not a brand new situation, but it's one that's becoming more of an issue, particularly because there's so many people doing the vote early.
Professor, there's a phenomenon in political reporting and in politics in which stuff that in the moment the press attaches a lot of importance to, usually I'm talking about a gaffe here, or some late breaking development. We attach a lot of importance to it, and then it turns out that it didn't actually move the needle at all. What is your sense of the relative importance of the president's hospitalization in terms of its impact on this campaign season?
Well, I think that it's unlikely that any people that were strong supporters of Biden are going to be at all moved by the hospitalization of Trump. And there is probably some concern among some portion of the Trump base to say, wait a second, this individual said that he was going to protect America, that it was a hoax, that it was not a real concern, and now he has failed even to protect himself, now is in the hospital and is getting treatments that are not readily available to the average American. So I think there may be a little bit of a peeling off of support among the Trump base. The independents, which are relatively already pre-decided anyway because they're already split mainly towards Biden and Trump, are probably not going to be as affected. I think that while we go back and forth about how important the pandemic is, and I certainly think it's very important, one of the things I found particularly striking was the debate last week. There were polls that were done, particularly the one I'm thinking about is the Wall Street Journal poll, that now has Biden nationally up by 12 points. He has consistently been up by about 6 points nationally since June, so that there has been a little bit of an impact of a particular event, and that was the debate. But now we're also having the impact of transparency and the illness on the president that's also going to play a role, and we'll have to see over the next couple of days how this plays out. My sense is it may not be as large of an impact as we think. I think that's already sort of cooked into the numbers, the sense that either the president is doing a good job about the virus or he's not.
Dr. William Rosenberg is professor of political science at Drexel University. He's the co-author of News Verdicts, The Debates and Presidential Campaigns, as well as The Politics of Disenchantment, Bush, Clinton, Perot, and the Press. Find him on Twitter at Dr. B. Rosenberg. Ahead of the debate, I think it was CBS that said that there were about 6% of the people who planned on tuning in were still making up their minds. If that's accurate, that shift in the Wall Street Journal poll seems a bit too big.
Well, I would remind the listeners that a lot of people don't actually watch debates and don't actually follow events in real time. But as you mentioned, one of the books that I talked about that I was involved with has to do with a mediated reality. Everyone knows what happened at the debate last week, even if they didn't watch it, because there was so much coverage that happened after the fact. Both the spinning and the true nature of the coverage of events sort of permeated the minds of virtually every person in the United States. So actually watching the debate is probably important, but monitoring or observing the coverage of the debate is probably even more impactful because it gives a context and it gives a direction in terms of what did it all mean. So I'm a little bit less concerned about how many people watched, but I am sort of aware that the media does impact people and provide sort of a basis for their decision making.
Professor, what, if anything, does the first debate as well as the president's hospitalization, what does that do, if anything, to the vice presidential debate this week?
Well, I think this causes even a greater focus on these two candidates for vice president, that there has clearly been sort of line in the sand drawn that Mike Pence is the loyalist for Donald Trump and is going to do his best to defend the president. And at the same time, Kamala Harris is going to be probably a little bit of a lightning rod for the Biden campaign. If you think back to the confirmational hearings at the Senate when Gorsuch and Kavanaugh were involved, you saw a very aggressive, very certain position that the Senator Harris was taking, and I think it's going to be sort of a very confrontational situation. And I think that a lot of people are looking at the two of them and thinking either one of them may become president of the United States, more so in the individual's minds than normal, because we have a sick president and we have an elderly candidate on the Democratic side who may serve one term, may decide to serve for a second one, but is likely to only be a placeholder for 4 years, and then Kamala Harris would be in an excellent position to be able to make the run for president. So we're going to get a little bit of a sense of how these two presidential aspirants line up.
Dr. William Rosenberg, professor of political science at Drexel University, co-author of News Verdicts, The Debates and Presidential Campaigns, as well as The Politics of Disenchantment, Bush, Clinton, Perot, and the Press. Dr. B. Rosenberg on Twitter. Professor, thanks very much.
It's been nice speaking with you. Take care.
Take care.